Under the blistering sun of the Arizona Badlands, Jesse Carraway rode through a canyon of sandstone in silence. His horse, a gray roan named Dusty, moved with steady rhythm, hoofbeats muffled by dry earth. Jesse wasn't looking for salvation. He hadn't been in years. He was trailing a coyote that had been picking off his calves, but what he found instead was a girl half dead hanging from a cottonwood. She swayed just above the dust wrists, bound to a thick limb by twisted yucca rope. Her skin was the shade of sunburnt copper, her face mottled with blood, her bare feet bruised, and above her head, nailed to the bark with rusted nails, a board read in angry red paint, "Whites don't forget, whites don't forgive." Jesse froze. Not from fear, from something colder. He looked around the canyon, narrowed here, a natural choke point. Smart place for an ambush. His hand slid to the Colt on his belt, eyes scanning the brush. Nothing but cicadas and the breathless wind. He dismounted, tied Dusty to a low mesquite, and approached. She was alive, barely. Her chest rose in shallow shudders like a fire on its last ember. He touched the rope. It bit into her skin like teeth. Whoever did this didn't want her dead fast. They wanted her to suffer. "God damn," he muttered. "What did they do to you, girl?" Her eyes fluttered. One opened, brown, frightened, young. "I ain't here to hurt you," he whispered, more to himself than her. With shaking hands, he drew his knife. The message above screamed louder than the wind, but he cut anyway. The rope gave. She fell. He caught her. She was light, too light. Jesse carried her like a child, her limbs limp, her breath shallow, her blood seeping onto his shirt. He looked one last time at the sign, then turned his back on it. At his cabin near the Verda River, a lonely shack tucked against the cliffs, he laid her on his cot, poured water into a tin cup, and dabbed her cracked lips. She didn't speak, just stared at the beams overhead as if afraid words would get her hanged again. He cleaned her wounds, whispering nonsense to fill the quiet. "You got a name?" he asked gently. She blinked but said nothing. He hesitated. "Tessa," he said at last. "You look like a Tessa. Hope you don't mind me borrowing that name till you tell me otherwise." That night he slept outside by the fire, his rifle beside him, the flames flickering in rhythms he didn't trust. Inside, Tessa didn't sleep. Her body trembled under the wool blanket like a rabbit too long in a snare. 3 days passed. Each one sharpened the question, who did this, and why? Then the cavalry came. Not in a swarm, but a single rider, Lieutenant Mason from Fort Verde. Young, clean-shaved, but cold behind the eyes. He dismounted slow like he expected trouble. "We're looking for a fugitive," he said, handing Jesse a wanted poster. On it, a sketch of a young Yavapai girl. Sharp cheekbones, straight black hair. The reward $75 alive, $25 dead. "Murder," the soldier said flatly. "And theft. She's dangerous." Jesse studied the poster for a beat too long, then folded it. "Ain't seen her," he lied. The lieutenant gave him a look that said he didn't believe him. But he left. Inside, behind the curtain, Tessa had heard every word. That night the wind howled like a coyote mourning the moon. Jesse sat on the porch, boots off, sharpening his knife. Tessa appeared in the doorway. She walked barefoot across the dirt, her steps slow but deliberate. He followed her from a distance. She stopped near the fire pit and knelt. With a stick she began to draw in the dust a bird, wings wide, flames licking its feathers. He knelt beside her. "What's that?" he asked. "My father's mark," she whispered. "Phoenix and fire. We painted it on our tents. It meant, even if we burn, we rise." Jesse said nothing, just placed his hand beside the drawing. Tessa's voice broke as she told him of the raid, the soldiers, the lies. Her brothers shot, her mother burned, her people scattered, and she left hanging as bait. When she finished, she looked up. "Why did you cut me down?" He stared at her. "Because once I didn't," he said, "and someone I loved died screaming." She didn't answer, just moved closer, and the space between them, once a canyon, vanished. Mornings in the land between red stone cliffs usually began with the caw of distant crows, the hiss of wind sweeping through brittle brush, and sunlight spilling across a weathered roof. But this morning, there was only silence, broken by the soft drip of water into a metal basin, where Jessie dipped a cloth to clean the girl's wounds. Tessa sat against the wall, staring blankly out the window. The light caught half her face, revealing the brutal marks left behind a bruise at her jaw. Rope burns dug deep into her wrists, skin sun-darkened and scraped raw. Jessie knelt in front of her, not touching her body, only laying the warm cloth gently across her bloodied feet. Tessa flinched but didn't pull away. It was the first time she didn't resist. "Tingling's good," Jessie murmured, eyes fixed on her feet. "Means the blood's still moving." She didn't respond, but her gaze shifted slightly, just enough to glance at him. Brief as breath, but the first time she truly looked. The days passed slow as tree sap. Jessie said little. He rose early, lit the fire, chopped wood, boiled water, then rode out into the hills to check his traps. When he returned, he left a tin of stew or cornbread by the door before heading to the barn. No questions. No pressure. Tessa began to eat. A little, but enough to tell Jessie she'd chosen to stay alive. On the fifth night, with the moon still thin, Jessie returned home to find the cabin door slightly ajar. His heart jumped, but there she was by the hearth, holding one of his old shirts. She wasn't stealing it. She was folding it. Their eyes met. Tessa moved to retreat like always. But Jessie spoke. "You know how to cook beans." She hesitated, then nodded, just once, firm, no longer afraid. "That stove's yours now," he said. "Make yourself at home." That night, for the first time, they shared a meal. Not across from each other, but side by side. Jessie tilted his chair slightly so neither had to face the other too directly. He told a story about a windstorm that blew his chicken coop into the river. Tessa didn't laugh, but her lips softened. "Tessa," he said again, like a name he hoped to keep. "If I'm saying it wrong, you correct me." She whispered that name. "It's fine." Jessie paused, not in surprise, but because her voice, hoarse and dry, felt like desert soil touched by first rain. Rough but warm. The next day, Jessie came back from the western ridge to find the floor-swept blankets hung out in the sun and a pot of beans simmering on the fire. Tessa sat near the window, mending one of his torn shirts. Sunlight filtered through her hair, turning it to dark fire. She didn't speak, but as he passed, she held out a cup of water. His fingers brushed hers the first time. They both froze, not in fear, but in reverence for something that had just begun to breathe between them. That evening, Jessie brought out something he hadn't shown anyone in years, a worn leather pouch containing a small silver shoe, the kind you'd give a baby. It belonged to his sister. He placed it on the table. "I had a little sister," he said slowly. "She died in a fire. I didn't get there in time." Tessa stared at the shoe, then looked at him. "I had 2 brothers," she replied softly. "Didn't get there in time either." No more needed to be said. 2 lives. 2 broken paths. But they recognized each other in the pieces. No one confessed love. One evening after rain, Tessa stepped barefoot onto the porch, the wind lifting her skirt. Jessie followed in silence. She tilted her head to the stars. "What scares you most?" she asked. "That you'll leave," Jessie said, "before you know I love you." She didn't answer with words. She stepped toward him gently, like mist rolling off the river, and rested her head against his chest. His arms wrapped around her, slow, steady, like he'd waited a lifetime to hold something real. In that old cabin, half buried in forgotten Arizona dust, no promises were spoken. But they echoed in every action, in Jessie stoking the morning fire so she wouldn't wake cold, in Tessa sewing his sleeves, scrubbing his scarf, folding his shirts. In the quiet way they moved around each other like dance partners in a rhythm no one had taught. Love didn't need to be declared. It took root in silence between steady heartbeats and the scent of smoke and rain. That morning the sun rose late. Mist still clung to the tops of the pale sagebrush, and the wind held its breath. The crows hadn't cried. Jessie Carroway opened his eyes into a silence that felt too deep, too still, the kind that meant something was wrong. Tessa was already up, folding the blanket by the windowsill where she'd sat the night before, watching him split wood in the firelight. Lately she moved through the cabin like breath itself, sweeping the floor, mending shirts, adding salt to stew without needing to ask. And Jessie! He felt something he hadn't in years, peace, and it scared the hell out of him. Then he saw it, a thin, rising line of smoke in the distance, sharp against the gray sky. Not a cooking fire, not driftwood. This was deliberate, organized. Someone was coming. Jesse stepped onto the porch, boots firm on the planks, eyes locked on that smoke. Tessa, he called, voice low but calm. She turned, and in his tone she already understood. We need to get ready, he said, reaching for the Winchester, leaning against the door. Could be someone riding in who's not here for coffee. Tessa didn't speak. She folded the blanket gently, but her eyes sharpened. Not panicked, not frozen, just alert. Do we run? She asked quietly. Jesse shook his head. Not yet. Running blind's just another way to die. Then softer, I'm not letting you go alone again. By midday, 3 riders came from the north, kicking up dust on the road that wound down from Prescott. The man in front wore a sun-bleached coat and a crooked tin star pinned to his chest, not official, not earned, just a badge. Joe Raddick, a self-appointed lawman from Copper Hollow, known more for hanging people than arresting them. Behind him were 2 more men, rifles slung, eyes narrow and hungry. Jesse stood on the porch, one hand resting casually on the post, his rifle within reach. Morning, Caraway. Joe called out. Heard you're sheltering something don't belong on this land. Jesse gave a slow smile. I've got a goat, 2 hens, and a horse that bites. Haven't seen anything else worth mentioning. Joe didn't smile back. He tugged on the reins, halting his horse by the gate. Indian girl, the one they're hunting, there's a warrant. $75 and the gratitude of every God-fearing man this side of the ridge. Inside, Tessa stood behind the door, a small knife in hand, the one Jesse had taught her to use. I don't see anyone but fools with dust in their eyes, Jesse said evenly. Joe's grin turned cold. If you're hiding her, you're just as guilty. Jesse stepped off the porch, calm, slow. Then you best ride back, Joe, he said. Before you find yourself on the wrong side of a choice you can't undo. No one shot, not yet, but every man had his fingers near iron. After a moment, Joe jerked his chin. The riders turned, hooves crunching dirt. They left. But Jesse knew what it meant. This was just the warning. The fire would follow. That night the fire crackled low in the hearth. Tessa sat nearby, her hands trembling slightly as she poured water. Jesse was at the table, cleaning his gun, slow, methodical. You should let me go, she whispered. I'm not worth dying for. He stopped, laid the gun down. It's not about worth. It's about what's right. About stopping this before it burns more lives than just ours. She stared at him. But what if they come back? He nodded. They will. And next time it won't be just 3 of them. Before dawn, a knock sounded. Not at the front door. From behind, near the barn. Jesse grabbed his rifle. Tessa was already alert, silent. The barn was glowing. Fire! One of them had slipped through and set it ablaze, cutting the horses loose. Jesse ran out just in time to see a shadow vanish behind the trees. He fired a warning shot. The sound cracked like thunder. No answer. But Jesse knew. This was war now. They spent the day preparing to leave. Jesse dug a shallow supply pit behind the garden bullets, water, jerky. He repaired the saddlebags, rolled up maps, oiled the canteens. Tessa didn't ask where they were going. She simply gathered salt, cloth, dried meat, wrapped the silver locket he'd once found in her pocket. By sunset they sat side by side on the back porch. Jesse laid a hand gently on her shoulder. South, he said. Past the hills, past the river, toward the border. There's land down there where nobody comes looking. That's where we'll go. Tessa nodded, but her eyes lingered on the cabin, this rough shelter that had once felt like a cage, then a home. Will we come back, she asked. Jesse paused. Then if you want to, I'll build it again wherever we land. That night the wind returned wild and full of ash. Inside the cabin they sat before one final fire. Jesse reached into his pocket and pulled out a small token, the feather she'd once drawn in the dirt, the burning bird. He placed it in her palm without a word. Tessa held it close. Then for the first time rested her head on his shoulder. Not as a guest, not as a burden, but as someone who had chosen to stay. At dawn they packed their things, saddled what was left. Jesse paused at the edge of the porch and looked back one last time. No farewell, no ceremony. Just the wind and the memory of something that had lived here once. But beyond the ridge, shadows moved. At least 7 riders, all coming from the north, and every one of them was armed. The wind picked up just past midnight, lifting desert dust like the fingers of a ghost clawing at the earth. Jesse Caraway tightened the reins, his eyes fixed on the southern trail. Tessa clung to him from behind, arms around his waist, cheek pressed to his back to shield herself from the cold gusts. Behind them, the fire had long died out. So had the house. So had everything they couldn't carry. And still Jessie knew they weren't alone. Roughly an hour after they left the ridge, Jessie spotted the first sign: fresh hoof prints pressed deep into the dirt. Nearby, a smoldering campfire still smoked. Whoever was behind them wasn't far. 8 riders, Jessie muttered, crouching to read the ground. Armed, trained, likely bounty men. Tessa didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. She trusted him now, not with just her life, but with everything inside it. "We'll cut through the South Pass," Jessie said. "If they follow, that's the only place we've got a chance." They veered into the narrow canyon just as the moon disappeared behind thick clouds. The cliffs rose steep and jagged on either side, swallowing light and sound alike. The canyon felt like a throat. One wrong step and it'd choke them whole. Then they heard it, the thunder of hooves behind them. Faint at first, then louder. "They're here," Tessa whispered. Jessie nodded. He dismounted, handing her the reins. "Right ahead. Take the deeper path. You remember it? And you? I'll slow them down, or stop them if I can." She opened her mouth to argue, but didn't. Instead, she looked at him for a long second, then nodded. She trusted him. That was the point. When the first shadows entered the canyon, Jessie was already in position, crouched behind a boulder, Winchester loaded, hands steady. The riders came single file, their voices low, careless. Jessie waited for the lead man to show his full chest, then fired. The man dropped instantly, a burst of red spilling into the dust. Chaos followed. Horses reared, curses shouted, rifles unslung. Another shot. Jessie hit a second rider in the shoulder, but now they knew where he was. Gunfire exploded. Bullets ricocheted off stone. The canyon lit up in flashes and smoke. Jessie moved to a second rock, breath hard but focus sharp. He didn't think of dying, only of buying time. Farther down the canyon, Tessa kept riding, her heart pounding with every echo. When the gunfire began, she flinched but did not turn back. Not yet, not while Jessie still had a chance. Then silence. Too sudden, too complete. She halted the horse, slid down, and ran back. She found Jessie behind a jagged outcrop, bleeding from the ribs, his shirt soaked red, but alive, rifle still clutched in one hand. "I'm fine," he rasped. "Just the edge of it." She slipped under his arm, propping him up. He groaned but stayed on his feet. "The rest?" she asked. "3 still standing, but not for long. They won't chase tonight." They moved again at sunrise, Jessie leaning heavy on the saddle, every step costing blood. But he never complained. The light turned the cliffs gold. Below them, the land stretched toward the border, dry scrub, low brush, and hope. Every few steps, Jessie's blood left marks on the ground, but he kept going. Tessa walked beside him, one hand at his back, the other on the reins. Her face was calm, resolute. They stopped beneath a mesquite tree when the line of the horizon cracked open to reveal freedom. Tessa caught Jessie as he sagged, his knees folding. She laid him down gently, pressing a hand to his chest. "We're close," she whispered. Jessie looked up at her, breath ragged. "Tessa, if I don't make it..." "Don't," she cut him off. "You'll make it, because I won't let you die." He gave a weak smile. "You know something funny?" "What?" "I used to think love was something that only lived in stories. And now I'm living in one." They reached the border under a cloudless sky. A shallow stream marked the edge. The horse stepped into it, water swirling around its hooves. Jessie collapsed as they crossed. Tessa caught him again, lowered him gently, cradled his head. No tears, no panic, just her hand on his chest, her mouth near his ear. "Listen to me," she said, steady as stone. "You are not dying. You are my home. You're the only one who didn't leave me." He opened his eyes barely. "And you," he whispered, "are the only reason I'm still breathing." The river didn't ask questions. It just moved slow and sure across the rocks and reeds of the southern land. On its banks, shaded by whispering mesquite trees, stood a small shelter made of pine and sun-baked adobe. Smoke curled gently from its chimney, and wild flowers swayed along the fence. Inside, Jessie Carroway sat in a wooden chair, one leg stretched out, bandages wrapped around his ribs. He was thinner now, a little slower, but alive. His face bore the quiet of someone who had outlived the worst part of himself. Tessa sat beside him, her feet tucked beneath her sewing, a baby shirt from white cloth. Her hair was pulled back, her brow soft in concentration, but her eyes held something he'd come to rely on: calm, like a deep lake that nothing could stir. "I think he'll kick the first time I finish this," she said without looking up. Jesse smiled. She shrugged. Or she. Either way, they'll be stubborn. He chuckled. "Then definitely mine." They sat in silence for a while, but not the heavy kind. The kind that fills a place without weighing it down like sunlight in an empty room. It had been 3 months since they crossed the border. The riders never followed. Or if they did, they got lost in the cliffs and gave up. Jesse and Tessa found the river with the help of a local vaquero who remembered Jesse's father from back when trade still passed through these lands. They built the lodge together, slow by hand, beam by beam. Jesse carved a small mark into the doorway, a bird in flames, wings spread wide. Tessa cried when she saw it, then kissed his shoulder over the old scar that would never fully fade. One morning she stepped out barefoot into the dew-wet grass, one hand resting over her belly. The air was cool, the sun barely over the ridge. She walked to the edge of the river and stood there still as a statue. Behind her, Jesse came quietly. "I keep thinking," she said, "what if that night you hadn't looked up?" "I would have," he replied. "Sooner or later. I was always meant to see you." Tessa looked back, eyes glassy but clear. "You didn't save me," she whispered. "You saw me. That's different." He stepped closer, wrapped his arms around her from behind, and rested his chin on her shoulder. "And now I see you too." Days passed in rhythm with the river. Tessa harvested herbs. Jesse taught a young Mustang to obey the reins. Some evenings they sat on the porch, speaking little, just watching the stars bleed into the sky. One night lightning flashed in the distance far beyond the ridge. Jesse instinctively moved closer to the door. Old reflexes. Old ghosts. But Tessa caught his hand. "No more running," she said. He nodded, slowly. The wind shifted, the storm passed, and inside the fire burned warm. Weeks later the child arrived with the first summer rains. It was a boy, red-faced and loud fists clenched like he was ready to fight the world. Jesse held him like he'd never held anything before, arms, shaking heart, silent with awe. Tessa looked up from the bed, pale but strong. "He has your jaw." Jesse smiled. "Poor kid." They named him River after the place that gave them life again. Years passed. River grew. He learned to walk along the edge of the stream, chasing frogs and whispering to the wind. Jesse built him a saddle by hand. Tessa sang to him in 2 languages, one from her mother's side, the other she made up just for him. No soldiers came, no questions, just time. One day River asked his father why his mother had feathers carved into the door. Jesse knelt beside him and said, "Because long ago a fire tried to take her, but she rose from it like wings. That's why you're here." On their 10th year by the river, Tessa woke before dawn and stood outside watching the sky light up. Jesse joined her, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He handed one over and said, "You ever miss the desert?" She thought a moment. "Only the part where I met you." He grinned. "That was the worst part for you. The worst things become beautiful when they bring you home." He raised his cup to that. Then they stood together side by side, watching the river still moving, still whispering, still carrying the memory of a night when 2 hunted souls chose not just to survive, but to love. In the dust-blown wilds of the old American frontier, 2 strangers met beneath a tree meant to take a life. Instead, it gave them a reason to live. Jesse, a quiet rancher with a haunted past, didn't walk away. Tessa, marked and hunted, didn't expect mercy. But from that moment, a single choice changed everything. What began in silence grew into something deeper. A love shaped by survival, strengthened through danger, and finally made real beside a river that asked for nothing but truth. This isn't just a cowboy story. It's a story about defiance, about love rising from the ashes of hate, and about what happens when someone dares to believe in you, when no one else would. Maybe it's not just their story. Maybe it's yours too. If you've ever carried pain quietly, if you've ever longed to be chosen, seen, or simply held, then you already know what this feels like. Click play to experience the full journey of Jesse and Tessa, a Wild West tale of love, danger, and the kind of hope that refuses to die. And if this story touched you, subscribe to Wild West of Old. Stories for more bold love stories, buried truths, and the fire that lives in even the quietest hearts. Because out here, every step matters. And sometimes the fiercest kind of love is found in the unlikeliest place.